your mom and I both were very deliberate in what we were doing there. She, was obviously your teacher in many respects, but she was also, she said, if we don't teach anything else, we're going to teach character.
Yeah.
If you don't learn math, 1 + 1 = 2, we're going to teach character.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Good Business. Today we're taking a little bit of a different route than normal, but I think y'all are going to really get a lot of value out of this. If you're a parent, or you're thinking about having kids, or if maybe you already have grandkids and you're just wanting to help raise up a legacy of leaders in your family, then I think you're going to want to tune in on this one. I'm honored to have my dad, Charles Vaughan, here on the show today. So, Dad, thanks so much for making the trek down from Denver, Colorado.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, when it comes to the reason why I wanted you on the show, I personally have had a really successful career so far. And I attribute a lot of that to the principles that I was raised with. And so I wanted to talk about that today because you look at my brothers and sister and they equally seem to turn out okay. No one's in jail.
In spite of us.
No one's in jail. No one has done anything that will end them up in jail. So I think that's good, right? That's a good
starting point. Yeah.
So I just wanted to talk about how you did what you did, why you did what you did, what was the formation of just your upbringing as well that instilled those principles in you that you therefore passed down to us. So that's why we're here today. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about things that us, meaning me as like a dad now, and the audience tuning in can do, and principles that can be put into action. And so, sound like a plan?
Let's go.
All right. So, would you do us all a favor and give us a little bit of background on Charles Vaughan? What's your upbringing like? What did the formative years of Charles Vaughan look like?
Well, that's very interesting as I reach back many years now to come with an answer for you there. I was born and raised in a very rural community, very rural, to the point of not having money, rural.
Yeah.
We lived in a 3-room house in Central Virginia that kind of sat next to an army base and farmland. That farmland, we grew tobacco, we grew soybeans, we grew corn, and I found myself in those fields as a very young child. Lord help us on child labor laws now, but the point is I was in the fields helping the community to do what they did best, and that was farm. The community was very tight, meaning you could go back generations and find many of the same people and families that lived there for their entire lives. My mother and my father came from that background as well. We lived in a little 3-room house there. I say 3 rooms: bedroom, living room, and a kitchen, with a what they known as at that time it'd be a coal-fired stove. So it was about a foot square by about 3 feet tall. That served to be most of the heat for our kitchen area, especially. And occasionally we'd turn the bigger heater on that actually burned fuel oil. So that neither one of those two things are very used in today's world, but it was very important. My earliest recollection was in the snow taking a coal scuttle to our little building that had the coal in it at night and being scared to death of the darkness around that. So even as a very young child, I still have vivid recollections of doing that and bringing the coal in the house for the next morning so that my mother or my father could actually put coal and get the heat going before us kids got up out of the bed and before we got our day started. Those were very very good, and they still are very solid times that I really appreciate because it taught me the value of hard work being earlier in my life. My mom and my dad were very much a part of the community. My father worked for the Coca-Cola bottling company. He did just about everything except run the company, I think. Whatever they needed to do, he did it. He was also in the National Guard and Army Reserve. And so there was a very strong connection with our military from that background. And my mother loved the Lord, and you could tell it constantly. And that really instilled in me a lot of values to the point that I accepted Christ as my Lord and Savior at a relatively early age, and that in and of itself helped shape my early upbringing.
So, lot to unpack there, but it's obvious that it was not an easy life.
No,
it was a full life. You were always doing something, I'm sure. And you were already at that young age being instilled not just with the values of hard work, but teamwork, because it was a family unit contributing to the health of the family unit, right?
right.
And it was a hard life growing up, and still a sweet life having your mom raising you the way she did. But it was even more difficult because of the situation with your brothers. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
That's right. I appreciate you reminding me of that. That's a very important aspect of that, especially from the teamwork standpoint. My two brothers, one older and one younger, were both afflicted with handicaps. One was cerebral palsy, and the other one was I can't even remember the proper title for it. But he never really grew out of a 6-month-old, even though he lived to be about 55 years old. And with those two in the house, and they bookend me, I had to help my mother quite a bit with moving them around and helping them until my oldest brother got to the age of about 6, and they had to put him in a home because my mother just couldn't really do everything that needed to be done for him, and also do for my younger brother and myself.
Wow. So, not to mention, I mean, your dad having that military background as well. I mean, I'm sure it was just a tight ship, and you got your chores done, and you helped your mama out, and you learned how to work hard and get a job done, right?
Absolutely.
What happened if you didn't do it?
I don't think that's something you want to hear about on the podcast here, but certainly discipline was a major part of his side, especially of upbringing.
Yeah.
And it didn't hurt me, but it certainly helped me to know what was the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah.
Because if it was wrong, there were consequences, and those consequences sometimes were relatively painful. But even now, I mean, I look back at that, and I'm grateful for that discipline because it helped me to know that difference and be able to work within boundaries, and that was an important part of that.
No, that's incredible, and it's incredible hearing that, because some of that I haven't heard before. As I think about how you raised us, so obviously your dad was teaching you, hey, this is life. This is what life is. This is what you're supposed to do. And I'm sure there were times where you bucked the system, right? I mean, you were a pretty good kid, though, right? in general. I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
Well,
But
there were times there that at least my mother thought I was the perfect child, but certainly what she didn't know won't hurt her.
yeah, there you go. So as you were growing up, obviously those were the younger years, tough years, tough time. And something that we don't experience in this world anymore. I mean, there's no outhouses. I mean, unless you're in the wrong side of the country. And you have a lot more amenities now than
Yes.
when you were growing up.
Absolutely.
And we're a very blessed country, a blessed nation. And so when I was growing up, I didn't have to haul coal in to keep the house warm. So very grateful for ExxonMobil and for you helping us avoid that.
But there were other similar things that
There
we
were other
asked you to
similar
do.
things.
Yeah.
But with that said, as you kind of grew up and you got into the high school years, did any of that change, or was that is it kind of all the way up until the time you left for college?
No, it actually wasn't, because when I was 10, we moved from the rural part of the country or rural part of the state to a relatively urban area in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. So it was quite a population. We lived in a subdivision there, and certainly with all the amenities that we did not have growing up till I was 10, I did have from 10 until the time that I left for college, and that was a big deal, obviously, to have many of those things, and we didn't sometimes know what to do with that.
Yeah.
But
What was that transition like? I mean, growing up, it was life is this way, and then I was missing out this whole time. What were you doing? Or was it more of just a shock and awe?
it was somewhat a shock and awe, but at the same time, it was still a very humble area. We lived in a larger house, obviously. I had my own bedroom for a while.
That's awesome.
And so that was really, wow, quite a concept. But those things were still not a matter of I have made it.
Yeah.
You know, it was more along the lines of, okay, we have a few more things than we did when I was growing up, but I still look back and remember those times that I did not.
So when you got to the point where you were in kind of a more urban area, when did you start to plan for college? And what was the plan for college at that point? Did you think you were going to go?
Well, that's interesting, because many of the people that I grew up with in the early age, as I look back on it now, there are quite a few of those who never went to college. But for us moving to a more urban area, then I began to excel in my education, and I was given opportunities in education to learn more, and even to have it more advanced placement. Actually was part of the Eagle Scout program. Actually goes beyond that point, that I was actually going over to NASA, which is in Hampton, Virginia, and be able to learn more about nuclear power and the power plants. Of course, nowadays that's not as much of a thing as it was in the 70s, but it still was something that it was a scientific breakthrough at that point in many of those areas, and I was able to be a part of that. In preparation for college, then many of those opportunities I was given then led me to a point of having opportunity to consider some major universities around the engineering universities around the country. And at that point, I even made application to like MIT, Rensselaer, and Virginia Tech, as well as Georgia Tech. So there was a number of opportunities there in the nuclear power, because I went there for nuclear engineering. And once I got into that program, I realized nuclear physics was not my thing. And so that was an eye-opening experience, in which time I said, I don't think I'm going to continue in this realm.
Oh, that's awesome. I remember you telling us about the nuclear component, but I didn't realize why you dropped out. So there you go. When it comes to just kind of that period where you had those opportunities, how did your dad and how did your mom respond to those opportunities? Were they supportive of them? Were they kind of neutral on them? Did they encourage you to go, or was it the other way around? What did that look like?
They were going to do whatever needed to be done to get me where I believed that the Lord was calling me to be. And that was another thing during that high school phase. It's like I had several areas I was very interested in. The question was, which one of those areas did I feel like the Lord was calling me to go into? Was it actually to be a worship leader or a minister of music, or was it going to be an engineer? Now, obviously, two definitely big time different career paths, but I had to decide, and I chose to go both ways, but one of them with education and the other one I actually did on the side.
Yeah. So you've always seen ministry as a huge part of your life.
Absolutely.
Cool. And that was through, I mean, how did that start? Was that because of your parents' involvement in the local church, or was it something else?
Yes, we were definitely involved in the local church, and I was involved in choir from the time I was 6 years old. Even in that small rural community, we had a group of three boys, and I was one of the three boys that we did a trio, and actually
I did not know that. I love it. So, so the reason I'm asking all these questions is, honestly, I'm selfish, and I hope you guys are enjoying this, but I'm enjoying this probably more than anybody. But I would love to just kind of help paint a picture for everyone listening in about what life looked like. And you're doing a great job. Thank you. What I would love to know is when you were getting to that point of being ready to go off to college, what was life like in the house? I mean, you obviously still had your younger brother with cerebral palsy in the home, and you were helping throughout all that period. But was there any feeling of, oh man, I don't know if I should leave and have my mom have to handle Raymond? Or, I mean, what went through your head on that front?
You know, I was probably pretty self-absorbed in wanting to do my own thing to some respect, but I was always going to be available to my parents to help in any way I could with Raymond. They did have a community that was so supportive of her efforts with Raymond, and including some opportunities for him to get some education as well. Okay. And so there was a lot of opportunity there that I didn't feel like that she was left alone. And certainly my dad was there. He was always an integral part of that, in spite of this, a lot of work, and he was working very long hours in many respects. But she still had the support network she needed to help.
That's great. So you go off to college, you choose Georgia Tech, right? And you decide on civil engineering instead of nuclear engineering.
Yes.
And not to gloss over the amazing college years, but you end up getting an internship, right? Or some sort of job at Exxon?
No, I interviewed coming out of Tech. And with, I guess, probably about 5 or 6 different companies. And I actually had 2 interviews with Exxon at the time in 2 different places. One was in refining and the other one was in production. And I got offers from just about every place, and I just felt like that the one that I chose was going to best meet my needs and be able to give me the best career path for what I was interested in doing.
So with that in mind, you begin your career. And do you start out as a manager? Do you start out in a director level role, or what do you start out doing?
I kind of laugh because with regard to that, because I started as a project engineer, which is doing smaller projects throughout the refinery at that point in time, and small in terms of dollar amount and in scope. And it taught me some basics about project management and construction management. That was something that was built on later on in my career. The scope grew very large by the time that I actually retired. But the project engineer role was kind of an entry role that even many people don't get today in other lines of business. And so that was a very valuable learning experience for me. There were people that came in later on in my career, and I interviewed them, and some of them said, "I want to be the president in 5 years," and I laughed every time that they said that, not condescendingly, of course, but to the point of saying, I think it's going to take a little
reality
longer.
check.
Here's the kind of things that you need, experiences you need to kind of have before you get to be the president of the company. So in doing that, their eyes were open and go, oh, okay. All right. So but that's where I started.
Okay. So to fast forward, not to gloss over, but we got a lot of ground to cover.
Oh, absolutely.
You recently retired from Exxon, and you were there your entire career. You were at one company your entire career. And you had quite a few experiences throughout that. And how did you wrap up your career? Like, what were you doing when you finally said, all right, I'm going to head off to Colorado and chill out?
Well, I wish I could say I was chilling. Well, maybe I am, depending on the weather.
Right,
But what I left the company as was the planning and manager, or should I say more than like the scheduling manager for our global projects organization. And so I was responsible for all of our schedulers around the world. And making sure that they were trained up appropriately, that the network was good, and also we handled on a local basis some of the pre-development or pre-construction projects. So we provided people in Houston for that purpose.
Gotcha. So for everybody listening in, and for me as well, I have no idea what any of that means outside of, wow, that's complex. But
there's a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot to unpack there. But I know that you've had an integral role in many big projects throughout your career with Exxon, and I'm sure they all were quite shaping in your career. But I'd love it if you could maybe highlight a couple lessons that you've learned throughout. If you want to highlight maybe a specific instance where there was something maybe instrumental in improving your leadership or in helping others. Any thoughts on that?
Let's see, where do I start?
Like I said, we got a 45-minute episode here.
Right.
So.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that come to mind, Clay. I mean, there's and it goes. Some of those go back to a time that I actually was doing marketing, and yes, marketing for Exxon, and then a later one where I was a part of major project organization. The one when I was in marketing, I actually had a territory in South Florida that was of convenience stores, and I was the store supervisor. That area there, we had probably 8 to 10 convenience stores, and I had a series of managers that I watched over. And when I went there, there were a lot of people that said, "Can an engineer sell?" I'm a civil engineer.
Fair question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But with that, I realized that it was not necessarily about my ability to sell, as it was with ability to lead a team to sell, and that team to sell were my managers. And so if I incentivize them to do what they do best and their strengths, then they could do very well at their individual stores. And they did, actually. I walked into a good group of managers, and I had to do some hard things with them too, but they were positioned then to sell, and I helped them along that way. And later on in my career, I realized that I don't have to be the expert in the room necessarily, but what I have to be, I have to identify the experts and then help them in their journey to be the best that they can be. Now, as it turns out, there were another reason for that too, because in that time frame, there were other things going on in that particular area that resulted in an audit of that area, not only my stores but other stores, and there were some people that were fired as a result of that. But when the auditors called me in about that, and I was quaking, I said, "What have I done wrong, or did I do anything wrong?" And they didn't ask me anything about what I did or didn't do. They asked me about how I was treated. And I went, "What?" And it turns out that my managers actually said, "Charles didn't do anything wrong here. His managers in that area actually supported me and said he was treated very poorly." And I just went, wow. That's the value of generating a team of people and incentivizing them to do their best. They rally around
and defend you
and defend me.
Wow.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
But there was another time too that I'd like to kind of lay out later on. To your point, fast forward to like 2010 or so, I was in a business manager's workshop, a time with 40 or 50 business managers from around the country, around the globe actually, we were coming in to talk about the role on major projects. Many of these projects from anywhere from 500,000 to pick a number, maybe 5 to 10 billion dollars. I mean, that's the kind of the size of the projects. And we were all talking about how business managers were treated on a project team. And there were people complaining about not being appreciated in their role as business managers. To give you a context here, generally business managers were considered to be the right-hand person to the project manager or the senior project manager, as it were. And many of them were saying, well, we're not invited to meetings with the project manager. People just don't look at us very like we know what we're doing, and don't invite us to help out in certain cases. And I went, I don't understand that. And I after probably half dozen or more people stood up and complained and said, yeah, we don't get that kind of appreciation. I went, what are you doing to earn that appreciation? I actually stopped. I got fed up with it.
I can imagine.
I said, what are you doing to earn that appreciation? Are you doing things that the project manager wants you to do? Are you being the leader that you need to be to your team and on the project as a whole? What are you doing? Are you being an accountant, which is not the role of the business manager, or are you doing things that really support that project manager? Those were two big lessons for me. One, the small team, and one, looking at the big team and how we actually support that.
So the general rule of thumb is if you want to lead, you have to appreciate and you have to respect your team, and you've got to respect the people above you too.
And as you have to do things that make them successful so they will appreciate that you are actually on the team and not not pulling against the team.
That's I think a struggle that most businesses face, is having that team camaraderie and unity. If you have any of those complainers who just assume, hey, I've got to be involved, well, you've got to earn your spot.
Absolutely.
If you're not pulling your weight, if you're not being the leader that you're called to be, well, you're not going to be appreciated. There's not going to be accolades. There's no participation trophy.
There's no automatic appreciation. You have to do things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that glimpse, Dad. It's the reason why I wanted to have a little bit of that pulled out is just to kind of show the kind of leader that you are and the principles that you abide by. Because when we're talking about this concept of building this legacy of leadership in your family, I'd like to pivot gears a little bit, because while your career at Exxon was extensive, was exciting in some respects, was fulfilling in many respects as well, in some seasons, maybe not so much in others. There's still something I think far greater, a lesson that needs to be taken away. And that ties into the development of leaders. You were talking just now about how you were developing leaders in the workplace, but that's not the only leaders. Those are not the only leaders you were developing. You were developing leaders at home. And I mean, personally, I can attest to a couple things. I'll just highlight the first one. You were instrumental in me getting into the entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, you gave me a loan. How much was it? Like $1,000, something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah, about $1,000 to go buy power washing equipment that we found at Northern Tool and start a power washing company. And you let me borrow your truck. You let me, in many cases, you would drive me to the location so you could have your truck, drop me off, come pick me up a few hours later. And you were more than happy to do the same thing that your parents did, which is empower your children to do what they're excited about.
That's right.
It wasn't, no, Clay, you've got to be a civil engineer just like me. I've got a slot for you right here in Exxon Mobil. No, it wasn't any of that. And it wasn't just with me. It was with the other siblings as well. And so I guess what I'd love to know from you is just, first off, was that intentional? Second off, what would you say is kind of as you look back on that time of raising us and you reflect also of how you were raised, what are some instrumental, principles for raising leaders up within your family? How do you do it?
You only have about 35 to 40 minutes on this podcast, right?
Well, actually, I just got to notice we have a little bit less time than that.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it really all falls back to character development and character traits that we instilled in you. And I say we because your mom and I both were very deliberate in what we were doing there.
Yeah.
She, was obviously your teacher in many respects, but she was also, she said, if we don't teach anything else, we're going to teach character.
Yeah.
If you don't learn math, 1 + 1 = 2, we're going to teach character.
Yep.
And if characters that's the foundation for everything else that we do. So the character that we put in you helps to form, just like I was early on in my formative years. Character traits were key to development at that time. You can't be a good leader without having good character. It's nearly impossible to do that, because those character traits some of those character traits are about loving one another, biblical principles that are very straightforward, servant leadership. I mean, leadership we talk about in today's world is just if you go back to its roots, you'll find it in biblical principles. You'll find it in God's word, and you'll see that servant leadership was what Christ actually demonstrated in so much for his disciples, and also as we see throughout the Bible. So without starting there, then you'll get lost along the track itself. So working it that way, and then we have to, as parents, demonstrate those character principles and traits to the children. If we don't do that, then all this other stuff is just words.
Yep.
Words on a page. We have a page on the refrigerator, if you'll remember, character traits, 1 through 29, I think it was. And each day or so that we would actually consider this particular character trait. What does that mean? Where does that come from? Why is that important? But you have to start there. You have to demonstrate that. So take that over to the business world. Now, you walk in the door with the character traits that you need to be successful. And now, how am I going to implement that in the business world? So as I consider some of the questions that you might have for me today, I'm going, wait a minute. There is so much more connection there than what I even thought of before we actually started this dialogue. And so that the connection is so important. I drew a line a lot of times between home and work because I didn't want to bring my work into home. I wanted to maintain that separation. But what did transfer was the leadership principles that I was working on and character traits I was working on at home with you guys, and the test place that I had in the workplace to see how that transferred back and forth. That was fascinating.
So I'm going to ask kind of a follow-up question to that. Is there anything that you wish you could have done differently? And I know that was not on our question list, and I promise you I'm not trying to get you in this moment, but I'm just, when I'm thinking about raising my kids, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything that you just shared, because I too believe in the value of instilling these character traits at a young age. We can just start out with simple things like the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and so on. That's got to be instilled. But what are some pitfalls that I think a lot of parents, and maybe you, I don't know, have made that should be avoided?
Well, I can't think of anything specific that we would change in that, but I can say that there are certain things that we emphasized that could very well be something that caused pitfalls, and that is around the lack of presence, not presents, but presence, physically being there, being a part of their lives. There are a lot of distractions in this world that could very easily distract you from being present in children's lives. And that is so important in what we do. And it's to be consistent, provide stability, give sounding boards. All of these things are important that fall out of the being present aspect. And so if I would warn anybody about that, I would say, be present. Love your children. Show grace. Show compassion. Be there, but establish boundaries. To the point we were talking about earlier, establishing boundaries there is very, very important, so that they will know as they move into other parts of their lives where that boundary is and what's right and what's wrong.
And I appreciate that so much, because in business and in any form of leadership, when you're responsible for the success of a team, whether it's in sports or wherever, you're rallying people and you're training people all at the same time. You're teaching them, hey, this is how we're going to do it, and this is where we're going to go, and this is what we're going to accomplish. And if you're not present, then they're probably not going to rally, and they're probably not going to be taught or to learn. So that presence obviously is a necessity. We see it as a necessity in work, which is why we work from around 8 a.m. to around 5 p.m. every single work day. And I think in another episode, there was a reference to a new book coming out called 96X. And 96X is essentially you have 96 times more hours, or 96 more hours, something along those lines, than you would in a home life or in a spiritual life. So there's more time spent at work. That's what I'm trying to say. There's more time spent in the workplace than anywhere else. And so if there's that level of emphasis at work, well, that has to correlate over into the other areas of leadership. So if you're choosing to be a leader in your home, if you're choosing to be a leader in your community, if you're choosing to be a leader for a local basketball team, you've got to be present.
Yes. And
you've got to also bring with you that tool bag of all of those character traits that you're going to be teaching to each of your teammates that you're responsible for. So I think everything that you just said is just a gold mine, and I appreciate you sharing that, Dad. And I just got the notice that I've got to wrap things up, so I'm going to just disregard that for a few minutes. We're going to go a little bit longer. So when it comes to just reflecting on your journey in work at ExxonMobil, in ministry. I mean, we didn't even touch on all of your work in ministry. And then obviously in the home, both in your upbringing and in raising your own family. When you think about the advice that you would offer to someone listening in right now, obviously we've talked a little bit about the character traits, about the presence. What would be like, hey, if you've got 5 seconds, well, we'll give you a little bit more than 5 seconds, but if you've got just a brief glimpse of time to share a piece of advice with anyone who's seeking to live their life in an honorable way and lead well, what would you tell them?
Well, I think there's several things, and not the least of which is having a wife that will support, encourage, and make you successful. That is,
amen to that.
Especially where I am is like, my success is only because of Linda and because of what she's done for me. The setting the tone for the family. Where are we going in our family? What is and I'll use the term vision for our family, but setting the tone is an integral aspect of that. I think those two things are extremely important. The character traits are obviously another part of that. But keeping a focus on the goal, where do we want to be? What do we want to do? And then working our way toward getting there. I think those are major aspects of the family dynamic. But there, you could see immediately the connections with business and how we work it on a team basis. On that 96 hours that we're not at home, we're actually doing things very similarly and using many of the same principles for that. I recognize that one of the key things that I always looked for as a manager or supervisor, when I went into a new team, I was always looking for my second in command, the person that could help me be successful in that environment. And likewise, when I told one of my project managers, I'm not here for your job. I don't want your job, but I want to make you successful. And I'm going to do everything I can to do that. So you see the dynamics that are going on there, home versus the work situation. That's what I would give you some advice on.
Well, thank you, Dad, and thank you for sharing that advice. That wisdom hits home, and I'm sure it's hitting home for the folks listening in today. So thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you,
Awesome.
Clay.
Awesome. Well, you're going to start writing a book about this soon, right?
Well, that's what I've been told.
All right. There you go. Well, stay tuned. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Good Business. I hope you were encouraged. I hope that you were able to take some pieces of what Charles talked about today, and also are going to be able to apply that to your own lives. I know I certainly will. So with that said, thank you so much for tuning in. Please give us a subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in today. And if you're listening in on Apple Podcasts, please give us a review. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to get your feedback. So until next time, we'll see you guys on Good Business.